We are making the bottoms on the North Shore, and on this particular one, I'm sewing the mid-rise bottom. And the only difference, whether on the sewing steps, whether you make low, mid-rise, or high-rise, is just where you fold your pattern when you cut. You can fold it down here, and fold it here if you want the mid-rise. And also, whenever you cut out your waistband, you're going to make sure that you cut it out associated with which rise that you did. And other than that, your technique, the way that you put it together will be the same. You'll need to cut one of your main on the fold. So I'm about to start on the mid-rise on this one. So I've cut my front on the fold, and then I've cut my back on the fold out of my fabric. And then I'm going to do the same for my lining. And your first step is to sew your main fabric together. You're going to sew your, let me get it on camera. You're going to sew your crotch seam and your side seams. And you're going to do the same thing on the main and the lining. So then you'll have two pieces that are sewn together. So just on, whenever you're trying to figure out the right side, it's easy when you have printed swim. It's so easy to figure it out. But when you don't have printed swim, you can pull it apart and you can see the side that has grain lines. You can see the lines, and that will be your right side. And then the wrong side, it doesn't have those grain lines. So on your swim lining, you'll be able to tell what your main side is, because it's really hard, but I can usually feel, and there is one side that is noticeably just smoother and softer. And that's the one I want next to my skin, but they both almost look identical when you're looking at them to me. So just make sure you notice which one you really like the feel of the most, and that one will be your right side. Okay, I'll be right back as soon as I have sewn my crotch and my sides on both my main and my lining, and we'll be ready for the next step. Now I have my two pieces sewn right sides together, and I'm going to turn my main one where the right side is out to where it looks like this. And then I'm going to put my lining wrong side out inside of my main. This way now their wrong sides are touching. And I'm going to line up all my marks. I hope that when you cut out your pieces that you made marks. And I'm going to line all of them up. I like to line up all my seams where they meet on all the different areas and get them all nice and smooth. And I am now going to baste my main to my lining. So I'm going to sew. It's easier to sew with your lining facing the presser foot facing up. So I'm going to sew all around, just trying to get the edges flush, just to baste all of these layers together. And then once I've finished basting, I'll be ready to put in my elastic. Okay, so now we have our bottoms basted together. We're gonna do our leg opening elastic. So you're gonna get out your elastic chart, and you are going to look at the second section where it says bikini bottoms. And for the mid waist, I am going to, it has the elastic width, and you're going to want to cut 2 on where it has the low waist, mid waist, and high waist, and that's all referring to your waistband. So that's the reason you're cutting 1. And then the low leg is referring to the leg opening. And you're going to cut 3/8 inch elastic, and then you're going to find your size and then the measurement there. So mine calls for 17, so I'm going to cut that, and I am going to apply it. And when I do, I'm going to apply it on the wrong side, and I am going to not stretch it at all along the front. So you're going to be applying it 1 for 1. You're going to keep it taut, but you aren't going to stretch it until you get to this back. And then from the side seam all the way to this crotch seam to the back, you're going to stretch it to meet. Okay, so I am going to start by measuring out my elastic, and then I am going to sew it into a loop, and then I'll be ready to apply it. So I'm going to take my elastic measurement, and I am going to overlap my ends by just 1/2 inch, and I'm going to set my machine to a zigzag, and then I'm just going to zigzag over it several times, back and forth and back and forth, until it's nice and secure. And I'm going to do that on both leg opening elastic pieces, and then I'll be ready to go to my serger. You can also apply your leg elastic on the sewing machine. That's fine as well. Just use the same elastic stitch to go around, but I'm going to use my serger. Okay, I'm ready to apply elastic to my leg opening. I've already done one, and I just wanted to show you on this one some tips and tricks. So I'm going to apply it on the lining side. I'm going to put the seam where I sewed it together right around where I kind of start sewing. I just have a habit of, that's where I put the seam. And I am going to put mine, another reason why is because I like to sew here, and you're going to put that in a place where you're going to start in a place where you don't have to stretch, because you can't really start stretching anyways until your elastic is caught into the seam. So if you start in an area where you need to stretch, then you're not going to be able to do that. And if your knife is engaged, just make sure you're not cutting off any of your elastic or really anything. And if you find that hard, you should just disengage your knife. Or even you can use your sewing machine if you want more control. So I'm going through the crotch area first, and I am not going to stretch my elastic at all. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just keeping it taut. And as soon as I get to that side seam and I see that I've cast it, that my needle is sewing past that side seam, I am going to start stretching. And this isn't just a little bitty stretch, because see, look how much elastic I have and look how much seam I have to go. So you might have to stretch it pretty hard, and that means you're going to hold it from the back. So you're going to get one hand and you're going to hold the elastic from the back, and then you're going to use the other hand to pull it. And the reason you're doing it from the back is just to help pull that elastic through, especially if you're going over like a seam or layers. You're going to need that trick. And to keep yourself from pulling it too far this way. So I hold it from the back, and then I pull as hard as I can from the front, without getting your finger anywhere near that knife. And this is where it's helpful that you've sewn it into a loop, because if you hadn't, it's really hard to hold this little end. And that last little hump where the crotch seam is, I have to kind of tug it from the back to get it to make it. Okay, so let me show you what it looks like. So the front, look how nice and even it is. While your back, look how bunched it is, because you had to really stretch. And that's good, because it's giving it firm stretch over your bottom. But when it goes over your bottom, it's going to lay nice and flat. So now that we've applied our elastic on our leg openings, we're going to top stitch it down. So all you're going to do is roll it to the inside, and then you are going to top stitch it with your cover stitch or with a zigzag on your sewing machine. So I'm going to start in the crotch, just because, you know, it hides where I've back stitched. So I'll start in the crotch, and then as I go over this area that's all bunched, I'm going to stretch it firm like this so that it lays nice and flat. And I'm also going to top stitch from this side, just because since I am doing it on my sewing machine, it's easier. If you were using a cover stitch, you'd probably top stitch it from this side. But since I am using a since I'm using my sewing machine and a zigzag, I'm going to sew from this side, so I can just go directly over my serger seam. So I'm going to set my stitch from my sewing machine. Scoot you back a little bit so you can see. I'm going to set mine to a zigzag, and I'm going to put my stitch length on 2.5 to 3 and my stitch width width on 2.5 to 3. And if you want, you can remove your basting stitches. They're not necessary. But I usually leave them. Unless I was really crazy on my basting stitches. It looks obvious. Also, if you want to change your thread to match a color, do so. Mine's at a white, so it's fine. We are putting in the waist elastic on our bikini briefs on the mid-rise, and you are going to do this like a casing. It's not like a band. If you prefer band, of course you can definitely do that and use the elastic that's in the chart, but I am going to do it like a casing as the instructions show. So you're going to start with cutting out. Make sure you cut your casing piece on the right line, depending on which bottoms you chose. And then you're going to put it right sides together, and you're going to sew the short end like this. And then once we've sewn that short end, we're going to attach only one side to the waistband. Okay, so I've sewn it together in the short end, and now that you've done that, you're going to want to quarter it. So I'm going to mark my halfway point on both. And my kids like to scream, so they're all fine. Okay, so we have this quartered, and now whenever I cut my pieces out, I put those in half, and I'll just check. The quarter points on mine are the side seams. So you can't always guarantee that, but always just check before you do that. Okay, and now instead of like a band where you normally would fold it wrong sides together and apply both sides, we're going to just apply it to where one side. So I'm going to put my seam in the back. And then if it's directional, check that when you come over and do this, that the direction you like is the one facing up. So I'm going to check that real quick. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put some, and this one, you know, I notice I'm putting these points that it really is not going to require stretching. It's just going around. You're going to get your compression to stay on you from the elastic whenever we put the elastic in. Yeah, it's a very slight, it's maybe just a ½ an inch smaller or an inch smaller. Okay, so we're going to sew these right sides together like this. So do not fold it like that, but you're doing it like this. Okay, so now that you have applied your casing all around your waist, you are going to look at the measurement chart. You're going to look at where it says bikini bottoms. So it's the second one. And then it has low waist, mid waist, and high waist. Cut one of 1 inch elastic. So I'm doing mid waist. So I'm going to cut one, and it tells me the amount that I need to cut. And I am going to go ahead and do that. And then you're going to sew your elastic. Once you've cut it, you'll sew it in a loop by overlapping it 1/2 inches and zigzagging it. And then you'll quarter it, and then you're going to apply it on this side of the waist casing. So on the outside. So not on the lining part, but you're going to sew all the way around on this part, and you will need to stretch your elastic slightly to fit. So that's the reason we will quarter it. I have my elastic quartered and attached, so it's a very slight stretch for your elastic. It's not very much. And I always put it, my seam where I connected it, in the back, and I'll kind of slightly put it off. So take that into account when you quarter it, because I don't want it directly over the seam, so it makes it too thick. And I'm going to apply it with my serger. You can also, of course, use your sewing machine with a zigzag stitch. And do not start any kind of stretching until you can see that your needles and your seam has caught in. Okay, now that we have our elastic attached, you are going to flip it up and around to where you're pushing the top of this casing over the elastic into the inside. And this is what it's going to look like on the inside, and this is what it's going to look like on the right side, and you're going to do that all the way around. And you're going to top stitch. We're going to top stitch this seam allowance to where it faces down, and then it's going to catch the back of this in that top stitch. I'm going to use my sewing machine with just a zigzag stitch, and once I'm finished, I'll just trim off any of the excess that is hanging over. I've set my stitch length to 2.5, my stitch width to 3.0, and I prefer to stitch it on the, I'll start on the back. I prefer to stitch it on the right side because that's the side everyone's going to see, so you'd be really sad to get perfect stitching on the inside and then wonky stitching on the outside. So, and then as you're going, you're just making sure that this band is evenly folded over. So I have finished my bottoms, and this is what it looks like from the right side. I love this method of doing the waistband elastic because then your waistband elastic is not going to be moving around within the casing. You don't have to mess with that. This is what the inside looks like. Now is what I'm going to do is get my sharp pair of scissors, and I'm going to go around and trim this. And when you're trimming it, you just got to be really careful that you're not accidentally cutting anything besides just trimming off the seam allowance. And then you're finished. There you have it.